All right. Looks like we're about ready. So everyone, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, or you can email me at sarah.fellner@pkware.com. I'll put that into the chat as well, and we'll make sure that the guys are teed up with your questions. So with that, EJ, you want to take it away?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is EJ Pappas. I'm the field CTO for PKWARE. We are here to talk about protecting healthcare data in the age of cyber threats, which sounds ominous and scary, but let's kind of move forward. So next slide, please. So joining me today are three representatives from Converge Technologies. We have Brock Greer, Tim Caulfield, and Nick Young, who are cybersecurity, part of the cybersecurity team. Nick's an architect, Brooke is one of the specialists, and Tim helps drive business and understand your business requirements. So they'll be joining me on this presentation. I'm going to kick us off and kind of walk us through the agenda and talk about what we're going to talk about. Nick's going to then take a few minutes to describe what the changes are in the HIPAA regulation, and I'll talk about some of the protections, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about that going forward and what you can do as next steps. So again, the agenda for us is to first talk specifically about what the new HIPAA changes are, what specifically they are, why they're important to you as an organization, and how it relates to your current infrastructure and current standards that you have in place for HIPAA compliance. The next thing we're going to discuss is how protections are important, and so why encryption and overall data security can reduce your risks and allow you to be more protected and more assured of your data protections. And then the last thing is just some ways to be prepared today. So to that end, Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about what the HIPAA changes are.
Thank you very much, EJ, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. So just real quick, what we want to do is run through some very high-level items about what you need to know about the new proposed rules coming out. So on December 27, 2024, the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Human and Health Services issued that notice for proposed rulemaking to modify the HIPAA Act, security rules strengthening cybersecurity protections for EPHI. So what do some of these changes include, right? So they removed the distinction between required and addressable and made all implementation required with very specific limited exceptions. So what does that mean to you? That basically means that at this point, some of those items where before you might have gotten away with being able to say, okay, well, we've done it this way or done it that way. Now are going to be required to be done a very specific certain way. And there's going to be very limited exceptions for that. Within the healthcare environment, right? So there's 18 total requirements. Some of those total requirements have subsets as well within them that will be required of you as an organization to take into consideration moving forward. The public comments on the proposed rule are due 60 days after the publication that was done in the Federal Register. That period ends on March 7th, 2025. So that's coming up here in a couple weeks. If that is finalized, it will go into effect 60 days after the official publication, which can be as early as May 6, 2025, so only a few months away. Entities at that point will have 180 days to comply and an additional 180 days to modify business associate agreements as needed, and those are going to be the minimums. There will be some situations and some requirements that will have a longer period of time to comply, but that's on a very case-by-case basis as you go through the new rule. So with that said, and if we can go on to the next slide. So we're going to go over a couple of the proposed rules here shortly. EJ will run through some of those along with us. So the proposed requirements that we're going to look through right now are going to be MFA, right, mandatory multi-factor authentication, enhanced encryption standards, incident response and breach reporting enhancements, third-party risk management, as well as regular security audits and compliance review as it pertains to data protection. So I'll hand it back over to EJ to kind of start running through some of those requirements.
Thanks, Nick. The first thing that I would say around this is nothing that was described or nothing that is in the new regulations is new or should be a surprise. So this isn't like they have changed the game in terms of providing protections. They are being more rigorous, and we're going to talk a little bit more about rigor as it comes forward, but it really falls into 5 sort of buckets that we're talking about. And that first bucket is really around using technology or leveraging technology to strengthen your data security measures. So things like providing discovery encryption of all PHI data, both at rest, as it has been before, but also in motion. So this is an end-to-end kind of conversation. We are talking about no longer just worrying about the data as it sits on your big iron or sits on your file servers or sits in a repository. This is about worrying about how that data is being shared both internally and externally within your organizations. So if you are worrying more about rigor, and the government is in fact doing so, then you have to first find and understand what that data happens to be. Knowing your data is the key important takeaway from that first piece of it, and then providing controls around that. So implementing multi-factor authentication, implementing MFA, which is almost table stakes for us now. We should just kind of sit back and understand the fact that you need to have some level of confidence to when you are authenticating into an organization to see sensitive data, they should make sure that they know it's you and that you are, in fact, who you say you are as you're going forward with this. So MFA is a nice overt step. The concept of encryption, both at rest and in motion, is something that happens under the covers or behind the scenes, and something that an organization needs to be able to have confidence in and rigor around so that they can kind of move forward with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. The second piece of this first bucket, if you will, is really just making sure that your policies are appropriately up to date. So things like conducting regular security audits or understanding and having a well-defined role-based access control strategy are really ways of providing rigor to your organization as it sits today. So we have in the past, when HIPAA was first put in place, there was always a concept of utilizing encryption as a means of protecting data and utilizing encryption as a method to provide access to that. What the new rules are saying is that they want to be much more explicit about what we're doing, and they want to have a level of confidence, both defined by you as an organization, by your auditors, by your regulators, and by your partners, that you are working in hand in hand so that information can be shared and work and can be and work across your business flows that you have today. Okay, so number one is a lot about technologies, if you will. Number two, improving your governance and your policies is really about best practices, making sure that the nice ideas that you have in place are documented, displayed, and can be audited and proven in terms of your compliance postures. So things like data retention or things like password policies and monitoring log activities. We have always talked about these things from before, but the difference becomes much more overt. So when we talk about data retention, one of the things that organizations have and organizations that handle personal identifiable information have all the time is that we have years and years and years of data that goes forward. So whether that is 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, that data sits in an organization. And as you migrate and move from one platform to another, data that started on your mainframe that didn't get sitting into an S3 bucket file repository that maybe then sent off somewhere else, you sometimes lose that chain of command or that chain of custody of knowing whose data it is, who was supposed to protect it, or how it was being protected. So the easiest method of providing control is to simply say, what is the least amount of data that we can handle and we can carry in our organization, and let's get rid of everything other than that. So getting rid of it could be as simple and overt as let's delete it. Let's not have it. Hi, I don't have to have data that's over 10 years old. Then don't have data that's over 10 years old. Get rid of that information. The second path, if you are uncomfortable about that, or if someone and some people in your organization are more concerned about it, then what you really need to do is you need to encrypt that data and lock down access to that as limited as you possibly can. So you're not using community keys. You're not using group names that are going to have access to the data. You're going to have sub names or sub access to it. It's going to be security groups. It's going to be administrators only. It's going to be some subtask that you're going to be able to allow those people to have access to this information, because you really don't want to have it in your organization. Deletion is the best control over data breach. If the data doesn't exist, then you don't have it. The second way of keeping information safe is by masking or redacting it. So the difference, vocabulary tip here, the difference between masking and redaction means that it's gone, right? Redaction means that I use asterisks in place of numbers. Masking means that I turn a social security number into another number that looks like a social security number, that feels or smells like a social security number, that won't break a workflow or a join inside of a database or an application, but it isn't the real number. So you can deal with that stuff. You have to have products that are strong enough to be able to handle those kinds of masking options. But masking, again, gets rid of the real data, which solves your problem in terms of being able to handle the information that you have. Strong password policies. This one seems like you've heard this forever about everything. So whether I'm talking about your Netflix password or whether I'm talking about access to your most important and private healthcare information, having a password manager that exists within your environment is an easy win to this one, with strong password protections. Not your name and not your dog's name and not 123 on top of password, or your dog's name with an asterisk at the end of it. Those are not strategies. Those are strategies that fail versus strategies to keep your data safe. It's also, there are products that exist on the marketplace that allow you to get rid of passwords altogether and use either smart keys in the PKWARE sense of being able to eliminate passphrases and let a product handle and manage that information, or not, or just try to dispel it with with other external product sets to make sure that that information stays safe. Last piece around this is monitoring and taking action on your logs. Logs are one of the easiest way that people lose information in an organization today. Logs keep track of everything that you have. They are proving that policies are being enacted. They are proving that things are being copied or moved or backed up or whatever it happens to be, but a lot of sensitive data exists in those logs. So putting measures in place to either purge those logs at regular intervals or encrypt those logs or mask those logs is a best practice and a best way to keep the information safe. Next slide. The next piece of this, the third piece to me is, again, one of the strongest that we have in terms of the weakest link in an organization. We can talk about all the rigor that we want about inside of the wall, inside of our own organization, keeping track of what we are doing with our information. But the moment that we work with third parties, you are eliminating your ability to take control of your information. And that means that once it falls outside of your walls, it's not that it isn't your responsibility anymore. It means that it's outside of your control. So you have to have as much control as you can with the information that you have, that you're sharing, so as to ensure that that information doesn't fall out, fall into the public domain. I like to think about this as, it doesn't matter if your company's organization gets leaked to, it becomes part of a data breach from a third party. If my organization loses its data via a third party, the headline in the newspaper is going to be, my organization lost the data. It doesn't matter that the third party did it. It's my data. So this is your reputational risk. This is your onus, your corporate risk that you're dealing with. So if your data is not masked, is not redacted, is not monitored, is not deleted when it doesn't have to be there, then you are increasing your opportunity for failure. You're increasing your opportunity for data loss, and you're increasing your opportunity to be looking for a new job because all this information fell outside of the record. So the pieces or the things that we talk about are just being rigorous around the agreements that you have in place, making sure people aren't holding on to data longer than they should, ensuring that your vendor assessments and security measures are being applied to and being worked on regularly. So these are updated, whether that's a yearly update, whether that's a quarterly checkpoint, whatever those things happen to be, make sure it's there, and always check the access to the people that you have in your organization. Know who's on your access control lists, know who those people are that are getting access to that information, and make sure that you're keeping track of that as you kind of go forward. Okay. Any questions on what I've seen so far?
Just real quick, EJ, just wanted to chime in for a moment. So on the earlier slide under step 2 around passwords, right? So, NIST has put out new requirements in the past, let's say 2 or 3 years around password complexity, length, and things like that, right? So I'd highly recommend looking over those NIST requirements for passwords and start looking at, incorporating that into organizational policy, right, for your user base, as it helps whittle down on the need for users to create really difficult, complex passwords, and really puts a lot of emphasis on password length, right? So creating things like phrases and things that are easier for your user base to remember, but also have the length to create that complexity so that attackers aren't able to easily potentially decrypt those passwords or use rainbow tables to take the hash values and figure out what those passwords are. I think it really adds a lot of credence to the user base and making it easier for them as you kind of traverse this landscape. So definitely something I think worth mentioning. If you haven't already done that in your environment, definitely something worth looking over the new NIST standards and making sure that you're starting to incorporate that into your password policies. I'll hand it back over to you, Jay.
No, thanks, Nick. It's a really good point. And I think I kind of jumped on it to talk about password managers. And a lot of times, depending on the tools that you're utilizing in your environment, they can help you make good decisions. So again, instead of relying on your users to ensure that they're making good decisions, you should have strong password policy, but making it easy for somebody to be able to say, put a strong password in place here, and then keep track of that so that I can have access to that information makes it easier for you to be as strong and secure as you need to be. Next slide again, please. So the last piece of this, which actually, Nick, kind of falls into what you just said, is enhancing employee training and awareness, right? So if we can improve the knowledge that our users have around what is required and what is expected of them, it allows us to keep track of the information and make this just an environmental part of your, making security a part of your environmental organization, as opposed to a policy that they have to feel it's being inflicted on them or put in place. So conducting HIPAA training to understand what data is important is a significant step that any organization can take to know what is important. Continuing the phishing and social engineering stuff, if anybody that has gone through security training within an organization knows that it's not just the email that has the bogus link that you are clicking on that we should be worrying about. It's the text message that you're receiving on your phone now. And it's the phone call that you're getting that is coming back in that sounds suspicious, that could have been suspicious, that didn't sound suspicious, but seems out of character or out of organization. So you having that information at hand or within at the ready for you, it allows you to be able to make better decisions as an organization. Because as we know, with security, if it's 2 steps to be secure and 1 step to get your job done, everybody is going to choose 1 step. So this has to become muscle memory. This has to become human nature to say, I just received this email. It looks a little odd. Call it phishing and send it to your IT department. I get a weird text message on my phone. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Hit delete, say put it into junk, and notify your IT organization. These people need to be aware of ensuring that any of the streams, any of the leaks that could happen within your organization are taken away, because this is the easiest way that information gets lost inside of an organization.
And to add to that also, EJ, another important critical factor, especially in the healthcare industry, right, to take into consideration when it comes to phishing and social engineering in general, right, as you mentioned, obviously email, right, phishing for voice and smishing for text messages, but also the physical aspect, right? In healthcare, a lot of healthcare providers, whether it's hospitals or ancillary units, like they have the ability for people to just come in and walk around pretty openly and freely, right? Because it's somewhat public domain for people to be in those environments. And so you need to take into consideration, making sure your employees are aware of their surroundings, aware of the people that are around them and how they're reacting in your environment and how they're acting in your environment. And if they're in areas that they shouldn't be in, that they're questioning those individuals and not just writing it off as, someone who might just accidentally be in that area, right? Understanding why they're there, making sure that you escalate those things as needed to any supervisors in those locations so that they're very aware of the implications of, having a physical presence or a potential attacker having a physical presence in your locations.
Yeah, Nick, and I think one other follow-up to that one too is another simple win that organizations can take is having rigor in your screensavers or in your machines locking within the time frame. So whether that's 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it should always be on. It should always happen and should always lock your screen because we can't always keep control over the locks on the doors. People are inside of our offices. People do walk through an office freely. And if there are office doors that are open, or if there is cubes, an open area, a lot of us work in these hoteling environments now. If your machine is there, you don't always think about locking it before you go to the restroom or before you get a cup of coffee and the like. And this is the easiest way to lose data and to lose information because your credentials are already on your machine. The machine is already open. Somebody can just take an act, something as simple as firing information off to a different IP address or putting software on a machine. Okay, next slide. Last but not least, in terms of these larger buckets that we've been talking about, is incident response. Okay, so when we talk about incident response, this is what happens when you have a breach in an organization. Okay, the word is when, not if. You hope for it not to occur, but so many organizations
Unknown caller.
So many organizations need to already know that this is going to happen. There are people inside of your network. There are people trying every single day to break in, to find out information that's there. They are looking for the lowest hanging fruit. They're looking for the problem that happens. And if data is breached, then you have to have a strong response to be able to take handle of that information. A response can be make sure that your sensitive data has been identified and has been protected. And protection can be encryption and protection can be masking, as we've been talking about. It may be, did we actually go through and remind everybody of what an audit and a compliance audit looks like? Have we actually talked to our audit and compliance teams? And did we actually fill out all the paperwork that is necessary to prove that we've done our work? Nobody likes an audit. Nobody likes compliance checking. Nobody likes to go through regulatory compliance. So whether that's happening on a quarterly basis, whether that's happening every 6 months or once a year, those are long and rigorous processes that people have to follow, but they need to be followed in order for us to ensure that we know where our gaps are, know where our weaknesses are, and we strengthen the weakest link in the chain. Nick, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, to add on to that, definitely. I think proactive response to incident response is very critical, right? So making sure that you're carrying out annual or biannual tabletop exercises, right? Typically, there's 2 vantage points that we like to see people doing them from, whether it's from an executive level, right? Understanding what your CISO and your executive team should be doing and what order they should be handling things and the likes as you move forward with an incident response. But then the other side is a technical side, right? What is your technical team doing? How are they handling it, right? So being able to take some common scenarios, right, and kind of walk through it on an annual basis to understand exactly how your team would respond and making sure that all those steps are put into place is absolutely critical to the success of any reactive incident response once something's occurred, right? You don't want to be creating the playbooks as you're going through it. You already want to have an idea and a plan in place of how you're going to react and a timeline and how you're going to react to make sure that is as quick as response as possible to make sure that the organization is able to reduce the amount of risk as a reactive response, right? When it comes to that point in time. So definitely something to take into consideration. Obviously, like EJ mentioned, HIPAA compliance audits are something that we handle on a regular basis, right? Typically coming in and doing a HIPAA risk assessment to help organizations understand the gaps in their security controls against what they currently have implemented, especially when it comes to the new proposed rule and understanding the implications of it and how it pertains to their specific environment. I think it's very critical to have a risk assessment done at least once, if not every few years, to make sure that as you build out infrastructure or add new systems, add new softwares to your environment, that you're making sure you're staying up to speed with everything that's going on in your environment.
Thanks, Nick. Next slide. So to kind of wrap this up in terms of what these regulations are and how we can apply rigor and protection to that stuff, the simplest belief that we have at PKWARE and Converge is that the fight is not around your perimeter. The fight is not around digging a deeper moat or building a higher fence or worrying exclusively around your access control. Have you cleaned up your Active Directory and the like? The fight is at the data level. So you need to bring the fight to your data. That means understanding and identifying all sensitive and personal information that exists in an organization. So discovery across your endpoints and your file servers and your cloud repositories and your structured and unstructured data sets and your Hadoop clusters and your mainframes and wherever that data happens to be, you need to be able to scan that information and know what is important to your organization. Once you have found that information, you need to be able to provide protections. Protections aren't just writing it down in a book and saying this is something that happens. Protections are encryption. Protections are redaction and other remediations that occur. You need to be able to make sure that your data is documented, your data is secure, and your data is accurate where it happens to be. And last but not least, in terms of what we're talking about in this slide, when we talked about retention, if you are moving the data that you have in your organization to controlled areas, if you've got a subset of places where sensitive data lives, you have a greater ability to control the access to that information and the ability to keep it protected as it goes forward. So using products like PKWARE provides within your organization is one way to do it. Using the knowledge and the skills of partners like Converge, who can do risk assessments, as Nick has talked about, who can help identify and build best policies and best practices, whether they're NIST or whether they're built on other frameworks that you guys are focused on and working through. We have an ability to work together to protect the information that you have and have you and provide you the greatest opportunity to have success. Any questions?
So EJ, it looks like we had a few questions come in. There's only 2 minutes left, so maybe we'll try and tackle one.
Okay.
All right. So how do you propose we maintain continuous HIPAA compliance, particularly in securing PHI across on-prem, cloud, and hybrid environments? Seems daunting to us.
I like that question, Sarah. So I would say the best way that I would talk about that is Nick mentioned risk assessments within the Converge environment. I would talk to your partners about providing a risk assessment, identifying where those gaps are in your own policies that you have in place, and then implementing products like we've been talking about here at PKWARE to be able to address those. PKWARE and other companies for certain, but PKWARE can address any of those repositories that you just mentioned in that question and can provide solutions to you there.
Okay, great. With only a minute left, I think we can probably bail, but as these requirements come to fruition, we'll definitely have a follow-on webinar. And if anyone has any questions or would like to speak to any of our experts further, please feel free to reach out. You have my contact information in the chat, and I'm happy to put you all in touch. So with that, thank you everyone for joining, and thanks to everyone that moderated this call.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
EJ.
AJ.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone. Take care.